Welcome home to Passionate Justice 167 for the week of 4 March 2017. I am Jonathan Wolfman on Our Salon Radio and on Alternative Public Radio International. Thank you so much for being with us this week. And you know, at Our Salon Radio, we invite you to read with us, write with us, and of course, you're not required to write if you're comfier reading and commenting, but I do think you will want to write. You may join the Our Salon readers and writers community. How many of us? Well over 1,100 superb writers and keen readers. Memoir, personal essay, poetry, political, social justice commentary. Where? www.oursalon.ning.com. Join us. Yes, join us. Membership. Membership, as with all the best of life, is free. And now, Passionate Justice may be heard, as I've mentioned, on Monday nights, 7 p.m. Pacific, on APRI, Alternative Public Radio International. And do dig this, you may hear all of Our Salon's programs, all the podcasts. Listen at your leisure. www.oursalon.ning.com/new episodes, one word, new episodes. And I ask you, watch on Netflix the award-winning film OC-87, a brilliant personal journey in triumph, living with mental illness, directed by Bud Clayman. Overcoming mental illness. Bud Clayman, world-renowned director and a friend of our program. Were you to write a review of the film, I would air it. And so, yet again, we begin with a prayer. God bless our newborn Reich. You see, I do become concerned when progressives analyze fascists' moves. Oh, you don't want to hear this one again? You're going to hear this one again. I become concerned because you need to hear it again, progressives. I become concerned when progressives analyze fascists' moves to a point of harm where what matters are their takes on each separately, deliberately steamrolled insult to democracy, so that by the time they fashion their pithily refined version umpteen, wasting thought, wasting energy, not subverting illegitimacy itself, in too many instances expecting applause for it all, they look up, surprised that detention wire and prison bars do not clap. And I may not have re-upped this one, people, except yes, this week there were more bomb threats. There was a shooting that blew out windows at a synagogue. Every Jew in America, with any reading and sense, has asked inwardly what might be a signal moment for leaving or for making resistance more than political. Every American Jew, particularly those not raised in homes with refugee elders, each of us has tried to fathom what they saw precisely, what they heard precisely, what toxic broth whiffed, and what they did not see, and what they did not hear, those who left Western Europe 80 and more years back, and what compelled those who chose to stay and become part of an underground Jewish centers, according to Matt Ferner in HuffPo, in where? St. Paul, Buffalo, and Amherst, New York, Birmingham, Alabama, Houston, Cleveland, Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, Nashville, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Tampa, Chicago, and more have received bomb threats. And again, one synagogue has had its windows shot out. The FBI says it does not know of any overall coordination, and this brings to well over 100 the number of such incidents in this calendar year alone across scores of Jewish centers and now schools. continuing a post-election surge. Well, that, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, it is, says the Southern Poverty Law Center, an unprecedented rate in religiously based hate threats and incidents in which those committed against Jews have always here in the United States been at the top. Since the vote, threats such as these have shut Jewish community centers in well over 27 states and one Canadian province. What we hear, what we do not hear. The president at his last news conference prior to his big speech at Congress responded to a self-identified Jewish reporter's concern about the rise in these incidents with a series of unrelated remarks about his own electoral prowess and the inappropriate nature of the reporter's question. And so he's been pressured into saying what an infant knows. Oh, anti-Semitic hatred, anti-black hatred, anti-Muslim hatred carried out in violence is, a bad thing. Oh, really? I would like to think that my brother, my sister, and I, and our adult children would see aright, would hear with wisdom, will act when necessary and with strength. What did our answers give us? What did our ancestors see? What did they hear? What did they know? When did they know? As for now, I'm staying and I'm broadcasting and I'm writing. And you know, as you are aware and must be aware, like me, you must be comforted by his beating subterranean expectations, delivering a talk that even the Times admits was in tone sober, however devoid of policy sense, and however his efforts to keep us safe may draw to the minds of the historically well-read the Third Reich main security offices and Bureau of Crimes Committed Against Jews and by Jews, retooled, touched up, to alert good citizens to what the Muslims among us are doing. Shall we really have now in the United States, people, a security office, Bureau of Crimes committed by Muslims, and then another office, a Bureau of Crimes committed by Jews? How about a Bureau of Crimes committed by transgender citizens? As you are aware, I am equally comforted by his sharing his curious insight with Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, offered as soberly as his address, that it very well may be Jews themselves who have been calling in the bomb threats to Jewish centers and desecrating Jewish cemeteries, well over 100 and more, as just heard, in 5 separate waves across this country and in Canada. Since when? Since January 1. His pithy, sober insight about Jews did not make the final cut of his speech before Congress. And you know, if you've been a listener to this program, even casually, from our beginning in October 2013, you know how quickly I prick up my ears when I hear a piece about language and politics. Yes, Orwell is the master. But there are other writers, contemporary ones, such as Thomas Fitzgerald, the political writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer, my home paper. He calls this the words of Trump. His predecessors favored rhetoric about democracy. This president speaks of crisis and decay. He declares, he barks, he tries to intimidate opponents. He uses short Anglo-Saxon words, sad, win, weak, and simple verb phrases, and repeats himself to drive his points home very, very. With 24/7 media, President Trump's voice seems to be everywhere all the time. On Tuesday, news channels will spend, and Mr. Fitzgerald was right, of course, predicting this, all day chewing over his first formal address to Congress before showing the speech live. What will he say? How will he say it? Some linguists and cognitive scientists who have systematically parsed the thousands of words Mr. Trump has spoken on the campaign trail and in office have concluded that he uses Democratic rhetoric far less than his predecessors. Indeed, the president most often uses the language of crisis and decay. Trump displays two different characteristics of many authoritarians, said David Beaver, a professor of linguistics and philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin. He's playing for an emotional reaction rather than making a rational appeal to the mind. The use of negative words emphasizes that our country's in danger, threatened by enemies, declining economically and morally, and also the need for control and a strong leader to save us. In his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention, Trump said, "I have visited the laid-off factory workers and the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals. These are the forgotten men and women of our country, and they are forgotten, but they will not be forgotten long. These are people who work hard, but no longer have a voice. I am your voice." Professor Beaver, along with Yale University's Jason Stanley, analyzed transcripts of 62 Trump speeches, his inaugural address, and campaign speeches going back to 2015, and with that database of about 75,000 words, they compared Trump's language with the nation's first 57 inaugural addresses, when a new president typically tries to summon the nation's highest ideals. Among the most common inaugural words are freedom, liberty, rights, and public. In the country's first 57 inaugural addresses, each of those four words occurs on average about once every 72 words, the analysts found. Trump used freedom once in his 1,433-word inaugural. In the service of national unity, we all enjoy the same glorious freedoms, he said, and salute the same great American flag. He made no reference to individual rights in the speech whatsoever. In the entire database of Trump speeches, he uses the four democracy-themed words about 20% at the rate of other presidents who invoke them in their inaugural addresses. Only the word public made the list of 1,000 words Trump most frequently uses, coming at number 938 most used. According to the database, Trump was the 10th most common word in the speeches studied, excluding what linguists call filler or stop words such as, the, or and. The researchers found several fear-tinged words among the most common Trump has used in speeches studied, such as mentions of China, Mexico, and Iran as dangerous enemies of the U.S. Others include border, military, hell, tough, disaster, horrible, worst, strong, ISIS, and the word he most wants right now to use as a fear word, immigration. Many have noted that Trump often stirs fear and takes an us versus them stance in his speeches and other pronouncements. He sets himself up as the hero who can save Americans from a variety of ills, enemies, and maladies and evils: illegal immigrants, foreign trade agreements that have sent millions of U.S. manufacturing jobs overseas, Islamic terrorism, and the specter of street violence, though the violent crime rate has in fact trended down. He says, "We are going to keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of our country," Trump said Friday at the Conservative Political Action Conference, an annual gathering outside D.C. here. "We will not be deterred from this course. In a matter of days, we will be taking brand new action to protect our people and keep America safe." Well, those days have passed, people. Noted linguist George Lakoff, an expert in political speech and imagery, argues that Trump achieves rhetorical power by exploiting people's unconscious thought with tactics such as repetition, framing, i.e. crooked Hillary, that's framing, and citing well-known examples of terror-related attacks such as the San Bernardino and Orlando Pulse nightclub shootings. Lakoff, who is director of the Center of the Neural Mind and Society at the University of California, Berkeley, says political orientations are deeply embedded for most people from their experience with family life, the strict father model, conservative, or the nurturing parent, liberal. Trump's language evokes the strict father. The basic idea is that authority is justified by morality, and that in a well-ordered world there should be and traditionally has been a moral hierarchy in which those who have traditionally dominated should dominate. The hierarchy is God above man, man above nature, the disciplined strong above the undisciplined weak, the rich above the poor, employers above employees, adults above children, men above women, Western culture above other cultures, America above other countries. Trump provides reassurance to people buffeted by economic change and globalization and social change. People who are scared are looking for control, even if it means they are more controlled. What Trump does is much more than doublespeak, according to the scholar who literally wrote the book on the subject, William Lutz, professor emeritus of English at Rutgers Camden. Doublespeak is spin or euphemism, such as President Ronald Reagan speaking of revenue enhancements instead of tax increases, or the military's use of, say, collateral damage to describe civilian casualties. But Trump will simply assert what he sees as a reality and does not back down when corrected. For instance, in a recent news conference, the president falsely claimed he had won the biggest electoral vote victory in 40 years. Earlier this month, Trump lashed out, and by the way, people, you must know that that's not true. He lashed out at polls showing that voters disapproved of his performance and were not supportive of his proposed border wall and a policy restricting immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries. Quote, "Any negative polls are fake news, just as the CNN, ABC, NBC polls in the election. Sorry, people, we want border security and extreme vetting," he tweeted in reaction to those polls. You see, people, this practice even inspired a real classic. You remember this, I know you do. Courtesy of presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway, her use of the term alternative facts. Alternative facts. Well, what does it mean when a presidential counselor calls a lie alternative facts? It means you're being taken, people. So, how do you talk to Trump? There's no basis for an argument or a discussion, Professor Lutz said, liking it to propaganda. It's a one-way conversation, and he does, yes, say it is straight out of Orwell's 1984. I know, people, that becomes a cliche. But when you're living in the middle of a cliche, you have to name it. You could only believe what the party tells you in 1984, not the evidence of your own eyes. That is what he is attempting to do, friends. It's an effective technique for him in many ways. You pound and you pound and you pound your message But what you do, even though that is effective, is it does threaten the nation's health in the long run. And this is not Democratic. This is not Republican. This is about democracy, big D, versus fascism, big F. In a sense, it undermines the democratic process itself, which rests on what? On discussion, on exchange of ideas. He's playing for an emotional reaction rather than making a rational appeal. The use of negative words emphasizes that our country is in danger, threatened by enemies, declining economically and morally, and he needs to tell you that he's the only one who can save us. And he said that directly. I'm the only one who can fix this. He said that at the Republican National Convention. Now, people, part 9 of the 11-part series from Harper's Magazine, Trump, A Resister's Guide. This is from writer Selena Sue. The results of this election are, among other things, a devastating consequence of almost 6 decades of declining political participation in America. In 2016, almost half of those eligible to vote did not exercise their right to do it. This is due not to historic highs of apathy, but to historic lows of trust in government. According to Gallup, 71% of Americans had a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in Congress in 1972. In 2014, just 28%. People are deeply and rightfully disillusioned with the ability of electoral politics to bring to power officials who represent the interests of the communities they serve. The Electoral College, the limited choices available in two-party system, voter suppression, gerrymandering, and the disenfranchisement of more than 6 million citizens, including many more no longer on probation or parole, all contributed to the election of a racist demagogue supported by a minority of Americans. Political participation is essential to a robust democracy, but we cannot rebuild trust in government without rebuilding the government itself. And I want to put in here, people, my own family, in my own family. Now, my son voted this year. He is near 30 years old. He's coming on 30 soon, and he rejects the traditional politics. He does. He's a good man. He is a deeply moral man. He is someone who disparages my trust in traditional Democratic Republican politics, and I think I do understand why. I, who was brought up by people and lived in a society imbued with the spirit of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and John Kennedy and Dr. King, I hold on to the hopes that my own son feels are not hopeful. I don't disparage his choice. He did vote. I don't know who he voted for in this past election. He keeps that and a lot of information about his public life close to his breast, and I respect that. It's not to say I'm not curious, but I do respect it. Now, this form of electoral politics that we have, you see, I think my son would argue, is necessary, but it is insufficient. It is insufficient. Equally important is the development of democratic institutions that rely on direct participation rather than representation. First adopted in the United States in '09, participatory budgeting is one such answer to representative politics. Typically, budget allocations, grants for computer labs in libraries, or meal programs for homebound seniors, they're made by elected officials at various degrees of remove. They're not close to the problems. Public budgeting brings constituents into the process, allowing them to articulate the problems they see in their neighborhoods, deliberate over solutions, and draft the policies that will govern them. In a moment of bigotry, in a moment of autocratic opposition to free media and discourse, such processes which require us to consider our public priorities with people unlike ourselves are radical. They seem radical. They force us to broaden our definition of whose voice counts. I understand the people who say, my voice doesn't count. I vote anyway. I participate anyway. I write anyway because I don't know what else to do in the face of what I do see as a fascist push in my country. And I do see it as my country, where the electoral system has engaged the usual suspects, older people of higher income. This kind of participation would give voice to those often marginalized, including young people, the formerly incarcerated, and the undocumented. When public budgeting was first tried in New York City in 2011, young people were not allowed to vote, but they could develop proposals, and their contributions impressed adults enough that the voting age has been lowered almost every year since there. The expansion of the political community happened partly because public budgeting enables participants to draw on lived experience and wisdom that does not depend on formal schooling. If a question's raised, for example, about which areas feel unsafe at specific hours, local knowledge carries as much weight as technical expertise, and it's harder for elites to dominate the conversation. Participants report that public budgeting deliberations allow them to inhabit more than one aspect of their identities. For example, their lives as African Americans, as parents, as sports fans, as city dwellers, as Midwesterners, on, and connect with people they might otherwise assume they've got nothing in common with. The goal's not consensus, which can often serve as a mask for domination, but generative conflict. Neighbors focus on changing policies that shape their lives rather than, say, getting rid of the people down the street. The practice combats what Henry Giraud, a theorist of critical pedagogy, calls civic illiteracy. It combats civic illiteracy, the inability to see outside the realm of the privatized self. The challenge lies in ensuring that public budgeting experiments achieve countervailing power and do not simply pay lip service to community involvement. For this kind of budgeting to be effective, communities must have authority over a substantial portion of public budgets, certainly no more than the governmental equivalent of the crumbs from a PTA bake sale. When austerity economics dominates budget debates, officials can use public budgeting to make citizens themselves choose cutbacks, forcing them to decide whose school gets a playground upgrade and whose does not. And if public budgeting is to make a dent in Trumpism, it must make and take account of the way budgets can reinforce racial inequality and vice versa, because you know, if you have a brain in your head, budgets, tax policy is the most telling way our society does enact social justice. One solution is to work toward public control over tax revenues as well as spending allocations. Should local governments in place, such as in Ferguson, Missouri, earn significant portions of their budgets by over-policing populations of color? No. But public budgeting can combat that. In a racially and economically segregated society, these sorts of local democratic experiments can reinforce existing inequalities, especially in the short term. What happens at a meeting, for example, when a bully shows up? Yet in contrast to conservative movements organized around local control, public budgeting aims to remake government, not weaken it. Ideally, participation prompts people to turn their attention from their plight as individuals to the conditions of their community, and in turn to the government, the corporate, and the institutional powers of determining those conditions. It shows us what democracy looks like as an institution, to be visited not just once every 4th November. People, I am going to save the last 2 pieces from Harper's Magazine's Resistors Guide for next time. And I want to share with you now from one of our favorite online sources, and that is, of course, Religion Dispatches, a Spencer Dew article called Bannon's Alt-Facts Satan. Spencer Drew tells us this: President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, famously expressed his admiration for, quote, darkness, unquote, and for the devil, linking former Vice President Dick Cheney's and Star Wars villain Darth Vader to a more traditional personification of the dark side, and that is, of course, Satan. That's power. It only helps us when they get it wrong, when they're blind to who we are and what we're doing. More recently, in pursuit of this vision of power, Bannon declared the media to be, quote, the opposition party, unquote, and said that the press should keep its mouth shut and just listen for a while. Bannon's admiration for Satan, a Satan imagined in the vein, surely, of poets Milton and Blake, the great English poets, the rebel against the establishment who has power via devotion to his own will, his own self. Devotion to self finds manifestation in this call to gag the press. Steve Bannon, of course, chastises the media as a long-time competitor who provided his own alt-media in the form of Breitbart News, and his desire for restrictions on a free press emerge from his own sense of being an embattled underdog against a mainstream or establishment media rebelling against it as much as Satan rebelled. Yet there's more to Bannon's invocation of a Satan than that, much more. Bannon's Satan isn't merely a misunderstood figure or heroic rebel. There's no note of hidden or misinterpreted goodness here, no rectitude somehow wrapped up in this image of Satan. Indeed, this is why such admiration of Satan from a man who has the ear of and is drafting policy for the President of the United States, a man now sitting on the National Security Council, potentially in violation of federal law. Well, that's why this is worthy of attention and analysis, folks. Put bluntly, the only thing valorized about this Satan is power itself. The dark power Steve Bannon envisions is that of a Satan as the prince of lies, alt truth, people. sovereign via control over what counts as truth. As Thomas Whitley has written within Bannon's framework, the fight for real power is over what gets to count as a fact in the first place. Truth only matters insofar as you have the power to determine what truth is. Such is the post-truth world, the world of alt-facts. Many tech and social changes have led to the possibility of this situation, from the rise of 24-hour news cycles and the collapse of the newspaper industry to the blurring of news as entertainment. As Emily Nussbaum observed in a remarkable article, all news items feel fungible. Oh, think about that. What a line. All news feels fungible. In addition to enabling burgeoning publication platforms largely lacking in any editorial oversight and facilitating physical disconnect and emotional detachment, internet technologies have allowed those of like mind, however obscure and esoteric their like-mindedness, to communicate and build communities reinforcing their own beliefs, leading to what Michael Quo called the spectral atomization of disinformation online. The power of Bannon's Satan resides in illusion, or in keeping this audience trapped in illusion, with no bearing on the really real, no sense of a reality outside the lies, the propaganda, the devil's version of the truth. This satanic power thus depends on a lack of discernment, a loss of grounding, a loss of discernment. In such a setting, one could never fact-check. Or to eschew the euphemism, one could never figure out if a claim were verifiable or merely a belief, accurate, a lie, or matter of faith. They're all the same now. We would not be able to confirm, to deny, or to recognize the possibility of confirming or denying those thousands of Muslim. President Trump repeatedly insists that he saw cheering in New Jersey as the Twin Towers fell, for instance. Likewise, we'd have no recourse but to take the president at his word that 2 people were shot at a political event in Chicago, or that a protester at one of his own rallies was actually an agent of ISIS. Yes, he said he knew it, and yes, he did not say how he knew it. It simply is an alt-fact as truth, friends. When commentators on the right cautioned during the campaign that Trump's statements should be taken seriously but not literally, they were laying the groundwork for the birth of alt-facts out of a language of hyperbole, which was simultaneously a language of smokescreen and plain-spoken statements that could always be partially retracted as exaggeration, as rhetorical flourish. No. They mean it as their truth, and they want us to have it as their truth, our truth, the truth. This was Trump's answer to the sort of consummately Machiavellian language of career politicians like the one he campaigned against. Compare, for instance, Trump on the Access Hollywood tape bragging of grabbing the sexual organs of women, using crude but clear language, with that equally infamous statement from President Clinton, "I did not have sex with that woman," turning to nuance to obfuscate, deploying seemingly precise language to permit an alternate precision. Clinton's statement, at least, existed in the world of facts. It was disconfirmed in detail in a special prosecutor's report. Alt-facts thus have a privileged place in politics, where they not only continue a trend of outrageously gymnastic engagements with the spoken word, but also of eschewing the tangled language of politics for plain talk. Oh, people. Oh, people, this is a very special passionate justice episode. I have used the word eschew twice. Back to our piece. Where alt facts prove more devilish than the old school lies, even the cleverly concealed old school lies, is in their abandonment of reality altogether, their leap from the verifiable to the realm of pure belief. You see, people, this is religious in a way. Untethered from their own verifiable false nature, claims such as Obama's supposed devotion to Islam, his barring of Christian refugees to America, or those crowds of cheering Muslims on 9/11 in Jersey, all function for those who accept them as alternatives to facts to reinforce not reality, but their belief, something internal and then shared. Not something external and known, internal, a belief, and then shared. Verification is beside the point. Verification is beside the point. This approach to reality is seen in other places. Certain satire functions this way, for example, as do miracles. The Onion snidely echoing Joe Biden's disdain for the incoming administration, or the appearance of a stain on an overpass wall that is read by devotees as a manifestation of the Virgin Mary. Belief is bolstered. Confirmation, or even confirmability, is simply moot. As any student of religion knows, not all beliefs conflict with objective reality in the same way. The belief in life after death, for instance, does not carry with it the same this-worldly consequences and conflicts as the belief that one can walk through walls. We fall for the trap of Steve Bannon's brand of satanic power. We fall for his brand of satanic power if we believe that the statements about Muslims in Jersey or illegal immigrants throwing the popular vote are merely matters of belief. Rather, these are claims without objective reality, and yet they are beliefs about reality and are matters of belief. Rather, these are claims about objective reality in the world which can be confirmed or denied, proven to be accurate or to be lies. I want to share with you now a piece by Yair Rosenberg of Tablet magazine. We've been talking to you about, and you've heard about, the attacks on synagogues, on Jewish community centers, on graveyards. Well, Mr. Rosenberg, wisely, I think, now that the specter of anti-Semitism has again risen in the United States, he wrote a piece that you're going to hear now about myths regarding anti-Semitism. He calls it 5 myths about anti-Semitism. And he says this: for a phenomenon often dubbed the world's oldest hatred, anti-Semitism is not very well understood, from top Iranian officials who blame the Talmud, the Jewish medieval book of rabbinical law, for the international drug trade, to British political activists who claim that the Mossad, that is the Israeli Secret Service, is stealing their shoes. Anti-Jewish bigotry can be bewildering and it can be bizarre. But given the prejudice's longevity, virulence, and recent resurgence in Europe, and yes, here in the States, witness the waves of bomb threats against dozens of Jewish centers nationwide in the past month, and the controversy over the Trump administration's repeated refusals to include Jews in its Holocaust memorial statement, it is well worth debunking common misconceptions that do impede our ability to fight anti-Semitism. Myth number 1: anti-Semitism largely subsided after the Second War and after the Holocaust. Really? In my time reporting on anti-Semitism, I've often encountered a certain well-meaning skepticism. Didn't the Holocaust, with its shocking horrors, finally compel society to stamp out anti-Jewish bigotry? Well, sophisticated people don't write this idea down, but it's one I hear constantly in my reporting. This is profoundly, depressingly wrong. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Jews in the U.S. are annually subject to the most hate crimes of any religious group, despite constituting only 2% of the United States population. The picture is considerably darker in Europe, where Jews were the target of 51% of racist attacks in France in 2014, even as they made up less than 1% of that country's population. In recent years, synagogues and Jewish schools and museums have been subject to terrorist attacks in France, Denmark, Belgium. A 2013 European Union survey found that nearly 40% of European Jews fear to publicly identify as Jewish, including 60% of Sweden's Jews. Non-Western examples abound as well. Populations of Jews in Arab lands, which once numbered nearly 1 million, have been reduced to only a few thousand, having been persecuted to the point of expulsion or flight. These facts underscore a crucial point. It's wrong to assume and wrong to subsume anti-Semitism under Nazism, its worst manifestation, when the centuries-old prejudice usually takes less extreme or non-exterminationist forms. The end of American slavery did not mean the end of American racism. It did not end discrimination against Africans here, African Americans later. The end of Nazism as a dominant political force did not silence anti-Semitism. Well, how about myth number 2? Well, myth number 2 is that anti-Semitism comes predominantly from the right. This past election season, the ascendant alt-right, a band of reactionary white nationalists with a penchant for harassing Jewish journalists, filled Twitter with neo-Nazi memes, photoshopped reporters into gas chambers and concentration camps, and chanted anti-Semitic slogans at political rallies. One could be forgiven for assuming that such bigotry flows from one primary political source, but no. Anti-Semitism outbursts were taking place on the left at the very same time. At liberal Oberlin College, a fine college, a writing instructor called Joy Carrega shared Facebook memes about Jewish control of the global economy and media, alongside posts asserting Israeli responsibility for the Islamic State and for 9/11. Oh, I've seen that one before, from the left. Yet when school officials and others criticized her conduct, the student council dismissed it as a witch hunt. In New York, despite a local outcry, the hip leftist hub Brooklyn Commons hosted Christopher Bolin, a conspiracy theorist who argued that Zionist Jews were behind 9/11. That one's been around since 9/11, people. During the Democratic primaries, Jewish candidate Bernie Sanders was confronted by a questioner who declared that the Zionist Jews run the Federal Reserve, they run Wall Street, they run every campaign. Surveying the scene, TBS comedian Samantha Bee aired footage of an anti-Semite ranting at a Trump rally, and then she cracked, "To find anti-Semitism that rabid, you'd have to go, well, to any left-leaning American college campus." And you know what, people, she's right. This bipartisan bigotry should not surprise you. Anti-Semitism could never have attained its impressive influence without forging coalitions across ideological and religious lines. Hatred of Jews has long thrived on its ability to ensnare utterly opposite world views. You see, people, this bipartisan bigotry should not surprise. Anti-Semitism could never have attained its impressive influence without forging these coalitions across these ideological and religious lines. Hatred of Jews has long thrived on its ability to ensnare utterly opposite world views. Myth number 3. Criticism of Israel is generally anti-Semitic. The state of Israel often confounds the anti-Semitism conversation. Some assume that an attack on Israel and its policies must necessarily be an attack on all Jews. Evangelical leader Franklin Graham, for instance, dubbed criticism of Israeli settlers an assault on God's chosen people, that is, on Jews. Others justify their attacks on Jews around the world by pointing to Israel, claiming to be anti-Zionist and not anti-Semitic. That is, to be anti-Israel, but not being anti-Jew. Much of this confusion stems from the conflation of all Jews with the state of Israel, its government, and policies. But criticism of Israel is not necessarily anti-Semitic. In fact, it is a popular pastime in Israel, that is, criticism of Israel, and among Jews across the globe. I myself, my Jewish friends, have criticized Israel a great deal. Objections to settlements, for instance, or even calls to boycott them are debatable political positions, not bigoted slurs. Dovish proponents of such views are no more promulgating anti-Jewish prejudice than those security hawks and religious nationalists who have opposed Israel's land concessions for peace. Israel is a democracy and can be held to account for its actions like any other nation. Myth number 4. But here's another myth that's a corollary of myth 3. You see, criticism of Israel cannot be anti-Semitic. That's an myth 2. And that's why this is confounding to a lot of people. Because criticism of Israel may not be anti-Semitic, but it may be anti-Semitic. At the same time, you see, criticism of the Jewish state can mask malice toward Jews. Some cases are obvious, such as when the organizers of a 2010 flotilla that aimed to breach Israel's maritime blockade of Gaza subsequently denied the Holocaust and claimed that Israel was behind the Charlie Hebdo massacre in Paris. That is anti-Semitism, people, even though masked by something anti-Israel. Similarly, those who accuse Israel of committing Palestinian genocide when the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics itself records a 4-fold population increase since Israel's founding are engaging in libel, not legitimate argument. In other, less blatant cases, Israel is subjected to criticism leveled at no non-Jewish country. Consider the United Nations, whose Human Rights Council has condemned Israel more often than all other countries combined, including Syria, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. As President Barack Obama's UN Ambassador Samantha Power put it, as long as Israel has been a member of the United Nations, Israel has been treated differently from all other members at the United Nations. In October, one UN body even passed a resolution denying the Jewish connection to Jerusalem's Temple Mount, Judaism's holiest site. What these unfortunate approaches all share is what? Well, they all share that they are treating the Jewish state in much the same way anti-Semites have historically treated Jews, singling them out for censure and implicating them in outlandish conspiracies. So what's myth number 5? Well, myth number 5 is that anti-Semitism mostly threatens Jews. Most bigotries debilitate their targets while empowering their disseminators, much like slavery and redlining enriched America's white majority at the expense of its African American minority. Many successful societies have been built atop prejudices. Anti-Semitism, however, is a unique case, and uniquely corrosive to those societies that embrace it. And why is that? It's because it often takes the form of a conspiracy theory about how the world works. By blaming real problems on imagined Jewish culprits and conspirators, anti-Semitism prevents societies from rationally solving their problems. In one of the most famous examples, Nazi scientists shunned Einstein's advances as Jüdische Physik, as opposed to Deutsche Physik, that is Jewish physics, as opposed to German physics. And what did it do? It enfeebled their understanding of physics. And guess who got the atom bomb? We did, not Germany. As Bard College's Walter Russell Mead has put it, people who think the Jews dominate business through hidden structures cannot build or long maintain a successful modern economy. People who think the Jews dominate politics lose their ability to interpret political events, to diagnose social evils, and to organize effectively for positive change. People who think the Jews run the media and control the news lose the ability to grasp what is happening around them. For this reason, Professor Mead warned, rabid anti-Semitism coupled with an addiction to implausible conspiracy theories is a very strong predictor of national doom. This is one case where the hatred ultimately destroys the hater. I would argue that American anti-black racism doomed the South as a nation. It did. In that sense, it is really not much different from anti-Semitism. I want to thank Yair Rosenberg for this wonderful piece. And I want to begin to wrap this week. One of my readers and listeners, a woman called India Elaine Holland from my home state, Pennsylvania, from Dauphin, Pennsylvania, listened to my show and pieces last week that I posted, and she wrote this in a flash. You might call it a rant. And I loved it. And I am delighted to share with you not only India Elaine Holland's piece here, but anybody who writes in response to my show something this wonderful. I'm going to read it as I think she wrote it, in a sprint. I cannot even guess what additive may have moderated his behavior for a moment when he addressed Congress. The primary facts stand. He is Bannon. Bannon is the president. We want his rusty, dusty ass out with his Russian co-conspirators, period. We know he is all that he has advertised himself to be. We want truth. We want every detail of his collusion with Russia. We want all co-conspirators unveiled and held accountable. We know he is anti-Semitic, racist, sexist. We want all the facts of Russia and him to be gone. History. We will not second-guess our brothers and sisters. Gaslighting is not working with me. In the cold light of day, I am a member of a Gold Star family, a descendant of Africans held in slavery to work without pay, a woman with some Jewish blood in my veins. I know coleslaw from potato salad. I know coleslaw from potato salad. We need to clean house expeditiously. Oh, India, what a piece. India Elaine Holland, my home state, Pennsylvania. I may have to read that one for weeks to come. And here's an end note. I published this the morning after his recent teleprompted ejaculations before Congress. I called this 3 sentences sober false flag Jew ops. As you are, I'm comforted by his beating subterranean expectations, delivering a talk that even the Times admits was in tone sober, however, devoid of public sense. And yes, I'm sharing with this again, people. And however his efforts to keep us safe may draw to minds the historically well-read minds the Third Reich Main Security Office's Bureau of Crimes Committed by Jews, retooled, touched up to alert good citizens to what the Muslims among us are doing. As you are as well, I am equally comforted by his sharing yesterday his curious insight with Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro, offered just as soberly as his address, that it very well may be Jews themselves who have been calling in bomb threats to Jewish centers and desecrating Jewish cemeteries, well over 100 such incidents in 5 separate waves across the country and in Canada since 1 January. His pithy, sober insight about Jews did not make last night's final cut. Oh, do we have a big job. So you, and you over there, you send me your stories, as Ms. Holland did. Poems, essays, send them to me, jwolf41387 at AOL.com. You must keep trying to live as if justice matters, as if what you and your kids do, it matters. You must be creative and courageous now more than ever. Take your place on that great Mandela, next to Bud Clay and all of our writers, next to me. This is our brief moment of time. Repair this crazy place, and you can. And yes, it's gotten more crazy, but you can repair it. You know what Phil Oakes said. We've got to do it while we're here. When else? And he could never have been more right. I promise you, when you act on justice's behalf, justice pays back, and it will most definitely make you happy. And I remind you, as I ask you to join us again next week, you may hear all of our programs at www.oursalon.ning.com/new episodes. God bless this newborn Reich. And yeah, always remember, here and everywhere, it is passionate justice.